Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered. With your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology, creator of the Salesology prospecting method, and I am also known as the queen of cold calling. Today, my very special guest is Karen Barber. She is the president of the Barber Group, and Karen has nearly 40 years of surety experience. She founded the Barber Group in 2002. This is a nationally licensed surety agency focused on construction, bonding, and advocacy with offices in Maryland and Tennessee. TBG is a certified, and I'm going to go with all the initials here, DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, WBE, Women Business Enterprise, WOSB, Women-Owned Small Business, and WBENC, Women Business Enterprise National Council firm. And her advocacy sparked in the late 1990s when achieving a federal acquisition registration change permitted annual bonding forms to support 5-year contracts instead of one bond for 5 years, giving small and minority firms the capability of bonding such projects. And Karen serves on the Small and Minority Business Advisory Council. She is the vice chair for the Airport Minority Advisory Council. She's on such boards as Women Construction Owners and Executives and the Girl Scouts Central Maryland for over 10 years. So welcome, Karen. That was a mouthful, but I am so happy that you are here.
Well, thank you. I did just retire from the Girl Scout boards in 24. It was a little too much with everything else I'm doing. And I wanted to focus on women contractors, owners, and executives. I'm on their national board, and I wanted to put a lot more energy into that. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, you can still get Girl Scout cookies, though, right?
Oh, I buy them, yes. And I was on the board of the Montessori school here in Westminster, and I just bought all the teachers a whole bunch of cookies. So, it's fun. Got to keep the teachers happy these days.
Got to keep the teachers happy. Absolutely. So let's begin at the beginning, which is where I always begin. How did you come to found the Barber Group? Tell us the backstory.
Well, I was one of very few female underwriters to start in surety back in the 80s. And, women don't always get equal pay, right? So I just wasn't making enough money. And I decided when I was in my last underwriting position to get my master's degree. And then I got pregnant during that time. And I graduated with my daughter in my hand. She was 1 year of age. So it's such a sweet moment. But I decided that I wanted to be a bond producer. And I was, I think, one of the first female bond producers that actually did cold calling and outside sales. And I love cold calling too. So it's amazing that the universe plugged us together, And I was very successful at it. And I did that for 8 years, but I wasn't getting groomed for ownership like I wanted to in the agencies because I was putting in 80 hours of work a week. And my last name was their company name. I represented them very well. And I decided at that time to start my own agency. And all of my clients followed me. They followed me from one agency to the next agency because I worked for 2 during that 8-year period. And then they all followed me in 2002 to start my own firm. And I started with $20, 69 clients, and about 10 surety markets. And I was only licensed in a few states, and it's grown substantially since then. So we celebrated 23 years in business this year, and I can't wait for the 25th. But I was so grateful because my dad was living with me, and he was elderly, and he had a bypass, and he He ended up moving in for 11 years with me, and he got Alzheimer's. And I had two daughters. And unfortunately, my former husband left the country, and I had a 10 and 6-year-old on my hands, plus my father. And it was wonderful to have my own company, because who wants to make excuses to your boss saying, "Oh, I can't come in today. My dad just fell," or "He put all of his food in the oven," and or it was just amazing what you would find with somebody with dementia. And my daughters were just so little, and I wanted to be close by in case they got sick. I couldn't take off work and say, "Sorry, I can't make it in today." I would have gotten fired. So it was basically for employment preservation that I started my own company.
Well, that's an amazing story. And I want to dive more deeply into everything you've just said, but I do have to start at something that you threw out there. What did you like about cold calling?
I thought anybody can send a letter or make a phone call, but I wanted to show my competition that they weren't going to shoot me down, because I was not well received as a female bond producer. The men in it's very white male dominated, especially back then, 20 some years ago, and they did not want me in their sandbox. My competition did not like me at all. They were not so good stories as to how I got my clients, but I took that in stride. And I knocked on the doors because I wanted to show the contractors I had a sense of urgency, that I knew how to do underwriting. I didn't need to take that information to a surety company for them to decide what to do with the account. I knew what was going to happen once it got there. And I was also when I was married, my former husband and I owned a steel erection and metal fabrication company. We renovated the Washington Monument. So if you ever go in the top two levels, every piece of steel you see, we fabricated and installed, even the metal casing that houses the glass membrane. So I know construction. I never want to do it again. I like knowing my receivables are real. They only look good on paper when you're a contractor. And so I think I had a lot of value, and I could present that in my energy when I cold called, and I was well received. And not everybody liked me, but you know what? I didn't like them either. I could walk into a building and sense the energy. I'm like, I don't want to bond this firm. Off the list they go. You can tell when you walk in a place when it's just dead energy, right? And so that's
Absolutely.
not trustworthy energy for me. And I need to have faith in my clients, because I'm going to make creditworthy statements about them, about their character, to the surety companies. And I want the surety companies to know that I've really vetted these entities.
That is also true. And it's interesting because when people talk about cold calling, um, they often talk about it from a point of desperation. So I like the positive stance
Hey,
that
I did it
you
with
take.
the map books, man. I didn't have GPS. I had these huge maps in my car, and I was always hoping the police wouldn't see me reading my map while I'm driving my vehicle. It wasn't cell phones back then. It was these huge maps that I had to read. And luckily I had a Tahoe back then that had that technology where you could tell you where the next gas station was, because I was in areas I had no clue. And one time when I went to DC, there were some bullet casings outside this contractor's door. And I knocked on it really briefly, and I said, "Listen, I'm not going to stay here, but I can help you make enough money to get the hell out of here. Are you interested?" And he says, "Yes." And I think he's been my client for 30 years now. So it's pretty funny.
That's a
But
wonderful
yeah,
story.
yeah.
Oh. So, what is it that, because I was reading about your company and your focus seems to be women-owned, minority-owned companies, construction companies. What made you choose that as opposed to construction companies?
It's hard for me to tell this story because I don't know how it's going to be received. But when I worked for a surety underwriter, I lived in Baltimore at that time. And when I was walking home, there was a bunch of Black men dressed in suits. They looked like movie stars. And they were walking into the Belvedere Hotel. And Belvedere was like an iconic hotel. There was movies shot there. So I thought maybe I'll get an autograph. Maybe one of these guys is a movie stars. So I followed them into the Belvedere Hotel, and I'm like the only white person there. And they asked me if I was a reporter, and I said, "No, I'm not a reporter. I'm just here to listen." And I realized these aren't actors. They were contractors. And they were there to talk about increasing the minority business enterprise participation on state contracts from 7.5% to 12.5% back then. And one guy said, "Why do we even want to do this? Nobody will bond us now. We can't we can't get our jobs bonded." And I raised my hand. I'm not a religious person that much, but I swear God put me in that room. And I was only like 25, 24 years old. And I raised my hand and they said, "Yes, young lady." I said, "I'm a surety bond underwriter. What do you need to know? I'll help you. We'll do an education program, whatever you need to know." That shouldn't be the case. And I said, "I'm going to go to my company the next day and I'm going to pitch this education program." And they said, "Sweetheart, this is not going to happen." And I was like, "Well, I'm going to do it anyway." So when I got back to the office, the president of the company called an emergency meeting of the underwriters, and we were all in this room around this big conference table. And for the grace of God, somebody in my head said, "Just shut up. Do not say a word." And I kept my composure. And the president was worried about, he called it a rally that happened at the Belvedere Hotel. And I'm like, "Rally? It was just a meeting." And then I just got so sad because I knew what was coming. And he said, "Our general contractors aren't happy about this." And we told him, "You just send those minority contractors to us and we're going to flat out decline them. So that's what we want you to do." So I left. I resigned, right?
Good
That's
for
where I got
you.
my advocacy bug. Because if they can paint a broad brush over that group of people, they can do it to me too, right? So I went to work for another company, but now I'm at the branch level where I'm dealing direct with agents. And at that company, we had 300 Maryland agents, and we weren't doing that much business. So I got the list and I called them one by one. And I said, "Do you have any minority firms? Do you have any women-owned small business firms?" "Yeah, nobody will bond them." I said, "You send them to me. I'm going to bond every one of them or figure out a way," right? And I did. And we went from like 250,000 in bond premium at that branch to like 2.5 million in 1 year. And it kept increasing every year. And we didn't have any losses while I was there. So that's where I got that advocacy. Plus, I grew up in an area. I'm from Dundalk, Maryland, and it's not the cleanest place back then. In the 60s, chromium dust would fall from Bethlehem Steel. I don't know where it came from, actually. I don't know where the chromium dust came from. I'm assuming from there. And it would land on the grass. It would put holes in our car. It killed birds. It killed the animals. And my mother would say to me, "Oh, you can go and play now. The red dust disappeared." And I think I was like 5 or 6. And I said, "Mom, I don't really think that disappears." So I always hated the fact that in these poor communities, big business back then was not accountable to the community. And I guess that just stuck with me. And I didn't know it until I was in my late 50s that I wasn't Italian. And I didn't understand where I was getting all this compassion from. Not that my family didn't have it, but then I realized my father, my DNA dad, I didn't really know him that well. I did meet him on an occasion. He was a neurosurgeon. So I guess that compassion for people spilled over to me in a different venue, right? And then when I started my business, I kept writing down, this is a little off track. I have ADD, so you can reel me in at any time. I kept writing down on paper, I want to help children in Maryland because I lost my mother when I was 11. And I knew what it was like not to have a mentor in the business community or in a community where you could say, "You can be anything you want to be, young lady." I was limited in my career choices, and I hated that. I could be a mother, a secretary, a nurse, or a teacher. I had very few options, where my brothers had many options, right? So I got angry, a little girl. At 3 years of age, I was really jealous of my brothers who had all these options and I was limited. But anyway, going off track. So I wrote off all these things. I want to help children in Maryland. And sure enough, the muscular dystrophy people knocked on my door 2 weeks later. And I'm helping children with neurological diseases.
Okay, I'm stopping you here. You said you were 3. This was much later in life, correct?
Yeah, so much later. So jumping
Yes.
ahead, right? So I'm just letting you know where the advocacy came from. It's coming from different paths of life. It's coming from when I was 3, when I was in the hotel Belvedere, and when I realized I wanted to help children in Maryland, and I didn't know why. And finally, your body has cell memory, and I'm thinking, there's got to be something different about me because I'm not in sync fully with my with my dad, there's something, different about me, and I couldn't peg it. So that's when I took my DNA test and found out that I had a father that was a neurosurgeon. And now I could understand why that cell memory was part of me, and I wanted to help children in Maryland. So the advocacy comes from different aspects of your life. And sometimes you have to be meditative, reflective to find out, when, right? And I took the Landmark Forum, which was a mind-blowing opening experience. It's a 3-day thing, $750. But by the end of it, I understood myself, and I understood why I have this advocacy gene. And it is a gene, just like people want to be doctors or anything in life. I guess people are just born to be advocates, and I couldn't, as you get older, you can't deny it, right?
That is true. So you may have ADD, but you tell a good story. So
Yeah, well, it's practice,
I will
so much
take it.
practice.
So let me ask you this, because there are a lot of people that don't have the kind of life experience that you've had,
That's a
and
good
maybe
thing.
they have that advocacy gene, and maybe they don't. Why do you think that? Because essentially, what we're talking about is diversity. All these different kinds of people. Why is that important?
I've never had to be afraid of a police officer pulling me over. I've never had to be afraid of people calling me names. And I've never been afraid of going into any door. But I have been limited in life in terms of career opportunities and getting my voice heard and listened to, right? And I too want a seat at the table. And I don't want to eat mac and cheese. I want to eat the steak, right? But I realized I'm part of that diversity and inclusion segment of society. I'm not as much as in the dirt as they are, but I'm on the dirt. And I always use the expression, nobody wants to be pushed in the dirt. We don't mind living in the weeds, but we don't want to be pushed in the dirt. And when you feel like you're being pushed in the dirt, then that whole diversity and inclusion becomes important to you. And I didn't want the MBE community, including the Hispanic community, to fail on their projects because they lack the information that I might have in my head, right? And the network that I have that could support them. And I bond general contractors. I don't want their projects to fail. I know from a contractor what it's like to be amongst subcontractors who are really just not contractor savvy. And they don't have to be minority to be not contractor savvy, right? But I think the white community has more resources and networks sometimes than the minority contracting community have. So I wanted to provide that community to them so they can be more successful on their projects, so they can build legacy wealth and send their kids to college. And every time when I was that underwriter writing a bond for a minority firm, I'm like, I felt so good because I saw the money they were making. I saw what they were doing with it because I see personal financial statements. I see their tax returns. I see their charitable donations. They're giving back. They're putting their kids in good schools. They're active in their schools. They're donating to their schools because now they have the money. And to me, that's what we want. We want everybody to be contributors. And if you take that access away from people, then very few people can be contributors to their community.
Yeah, I think you just answered the next question I was going to ask, which is why should, I'll speak for myself, someone who's a white person, why should somebody that's a white person care about diversity and inclusion?
Well, some people say, I don't see color, but I think you should see color because that's their ethnic background. That's who they are. But in business, to be honest, let's just see people and see what they can contribute, and then celebrate their culture, right? And see what that culture can bring to the business world. Everybody has different ideas, different talents, depending, like I mean, I don't want to stereotype, but the Italians are such great people. I grew up in an Italian family, and my mother was Polish, and I saw two different cultures collide, and it was wonderful. It was hysterical too. I mean, to see how my Polish side of the family would get so upset and just get worry about every little dime and dollar, and my Italian side was like, oh, it's okay, everything's going to be all right. You need money, I got money for you. It was so strange, and I loved it. I loved seeing how they approach life, and they both had good points about how to live their life. And when you can put all of that in the middle and bring it together, you can create some really good business ideas and some really good ways of living your life. And because we don't live in absolutes. And I think if you just want to do all white, that's an absolute. You have to live in the middle because that's where 90%, I would say, of the people live. They live in the middle.
Okay. And you want people to have opportunities to be successful.
In the 60s, I couldn't really have any Black friends, right? Just couldn't. That it just wasn't something that my parents were going to allow a Black person in their home. Right.
Yeah. Well, as somebody that checks a fair number of minority boxes, as a Jew, our next door neighbors wouldn't let their kids play with us.
Of course. And I did not live in a Jewish community. I was Orthodox Catholic, and I have to tell you, I'm not anymore. But when my mother, unfortunately, we didn't know she had cancer at the time, and we didn't have a lot of money, but she was so excited to get a new refrigerator, and she couldn't wait to cross the street to tell her friend about it. And on the way back, a man hit her, and she was very badly injured. And I saw a Black man in my house when I was running up to see what was happening because I was at my neighbor's house. And the face that I saw, my mother had Black hair like mine, but the whole face was full of blood. So I thought that was his wife on the street. And I was crying for him, and he was crying for me because that Black man stopped and got into my house and called 911 and saved my mother. And that's when I realized we are just all people. We are just, we're all here to help each other. And one time my father, he had a grocery store. My father was not a prejudiced man. He was a good man, but he had to worry about the neighborhood, right? But the KKK visited his store when I was a young girl, and he misspelled the word colored on purpose. And he put a sign, no coloreds allowed. And I said, Dad, what is this about? He said, well, they visited my store and they said they would do damage to me if I didn't. I said, we're taking it down. Dad, that's not us. We're going to take it down. You're from immigrants. Your grandparents couldn't speak any English, and Pop wasn't even a citizen, so come on. So I took it down and nothing happened. So I learned then if you step through the fear factor, it's always better on the other side. I don't know if I went off topic, but I think you wanted to know why all white's not good, and that's why it's not good.
Yeah. Well, I also really like what you just said about when you step through the fear, because that applies to
everything,
what we're talking about, but it just applies to absolutely everything. So, so this has been such an interesting conversation, Karen. If people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you? How can people get in touch with you?
My website is thebarbergroup.com, and I do have people with Hispanic descent working for me. So I formed the Alliance for Hispanic Commercial Contractors, and we're I think one of the only organizations that the sponsorship money we receive, we get back to our members. We help pay for financial statements and bank lines of credit and anything they need if we have the money to support their business. And free consulting. So if there's any consultants listening and you think you want to add value to an Hispanic firm and they can't afford it, or they're just leery about signing you on, we can pay for the first hour or two if we have the money. But we're happy that Milwaukee Tools is going to be signing on soon as a sponsor. So we're very excited about that. We also have Whiting Turner as a sponsor, and M&T Bank is supporting us. My firm is, and Maryland Department of Transportation. But we also have Party for a Cure. If you want to, we're not having a gala this year because my daughter's going to have a baby. There's a wedding coming. So it's a little busy for us, but it's pfac-md.org. And we don't keep any of the money. It's a volunteer board. We give all the money back to families. It's direct. We broke away from MDA back in 2016 so we could give all the money right to families. But I also wrote a new political platform called the National Small Business Party to give small business a voice in Congress, because we can't even determine our size standards, for example. And all the politicians say that we're the backbone of the world or society, but we don't have a spine in Congress. And most small businesses are Republican, but they don't vote their party line if they feel that candidate is going to vote small business. So why not capture their vote? It is a living platform. My sources are all cited like no other platform. And you can always email me and ask me, could I add this content in? And if the board says it's valid, we can put it in and we can add your 2 cents worth and give you credit for it. So that's my story. You can also reach me at Karen@thebarbourgroup.com. And Barber is Barbour.
Hey, and in case for our audience, in case you didn't grab a pen and write that all down, we're going to put all of those links in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, go to the show notes, click on all of the links, connect with Karen, and thank you so
I'm a
much.
Nice Karen. I'm not the Karen, that's out there right now. I'm the nice one.
Yes, connect with the nice Karen, with Karen Barber, Barbour.
Yeah, it's Scottish. I'm not, it's my former husband's last name. And a lot of people say Barbour or Barbour, but it's Barber. Because, the English spell color with an O-U-R too. So they mess it up for us. Right.
That is true. So thank you so much, Karen. And to our listeners, you've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, with my extra special guest, Karen Barber, who is the president of the Barber Group.
Yeah. I love your energy. It's very nice. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And to our audience, if you found value in listening to this podcast, then please think about one business owner, one sales leader, one entrepreneur, somebody that you know that also might find value in listening to this podcast, and please do share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
Yes, millions and millions.
Millions and millions.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.